Hello, and welcome to Pulpit Counterpulpit at Culver Stockton College. My name is Dr. Andrew D. Walsh, and I am a professor of religion and philosophy here at Culver Stockton College. Tonight, we are going to be looking at one of the hot-button issues in the culture wars, and that is the issue of abortion. I have asked two people to come and to represent each side of this debate. We're going to begin with Drew Dean. Drew Dean went to Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, where he earned a Master of Theological Studies degree in ethics. And Drew Dean is going to be presenting the pro-life position. I would also like to invite Andy Walsh, and Andy Walsh got his PhD studying ethics and politics in religion and society at Drew University. And he is also an elder of his church. And we are going to ask him to represent the pro-choice position. One thing I want to say about the Pulpit Counterpulpit series is that the point of this debate is not to humiliate the other. My hope is that we can demonstrate civility in a world that often lacks civility, particularly when we deal with issues like abortion. Another goal is that perhaps we can even find common ground among people who disagree passionately on an issue like this. So please, if you have questions or comments, let me know. My name is Drew Dean. I am a Christian, and I am pro-life. The reason I am pro-life is because every human being I see is a brother or sister created in the image of God. All of you, every human being on this planet, regardless of race, class, religion, and age, even the unborn, are my brothers and sisters for whom Christ died. The weak, the powerless, the voiceless, these were of special concern to Christ. Why am I saying this is such a significant issue? Well, because there are about 50 million abortions performed every year around the world. 50 million. Think of the response of the United States when over 3,000 American citizens were killed on September 11, 2001. A horrible tragedy. And yet we look the other way when we know there are 50 million abortions worldwide. We know that there were 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust, 9 million killed altogether. And I do not mean to diminish this tragedy in any way. But when people say never again to a tragedy like that, what do we do with 50 million being killed and everybody looking the other way? What's going on here? In the United States, 1 in 4 babies will be the victim of abortion. 1 in 4 pregnancies will be terminated by an abortion. An estimated 43% of American women will have an abortion by the age of 45. It seems to me that abortion is a legitimate litmus test. If we do not value life, how can we value happiness, liberty, justice? All these other virtues are dependent on a respect for human life. And if we don't have a respect for human life, what do we have? Thank you all for coming. My name is Andy Walsh, and I am pro-choice, I am a Christian, and I am pro-life. The idea that those of us who support a woman's right to choose an abortion, at least early in her pregnancy, are somehow opposed to human life seems to me to completely miss the point. I guess part of the issue that needs to be addressed is what are we talking about? When is it that God decides that what we are calling a fetus is a human being that ought to be treated with the same respect that we would treat a baby? Just like there's a difference between fried eggs and fried chicken, okay, maybe a bad analogy, there's clearly a difference between a fertilized egg and a human being. If you look at the Roe versus Wade decision, you will see that the Supreme Court did not ignore religion. It didn't say because some people are religious and they believe abortion is wrong that we shouldn't do it. Rather, they looked exhaustively at the history of the ancient Greek attitudes, and they looked at the history of Christian attitudes about when ensoulment occurs. Now, if you go back to St. Thomas Aquinas, he talked about ensoulment occurring 40 days after birth for a boy, 40 days after conception for a boy, 80 days after conception for a girl, and that becomes part of common law. It is not until the 19th century that the Catholic Church begins to argue that life begins at conception. I think that we need to acknowledge, as the Supreme Court decision did, that there is a great deal of diversity of opinion about when human life begins. Now, if you want to say that all human tissue is created in the image of God, I would say that somebody who has a tumor need not avoid surgery because they are killing something that's human. I would say that there is a huge difference. I would also say there's a profound difference between potential life and actual life. I think that there have been some people who have said that every sperm is sacred. Well, clearly I do not embrace that point of view, particularly when you look at how many sperm are killed off. That would make God the greatest murderer of all time. There is so much I could say about this issue, but for now I simply want to say the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice includes many Christian churches, in addition to the Reformed Jews and Conservative Jews. There's the Episcopal Church, the United Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, the United Church of Christ. There's the Unitarian Universalist Association, the American Baptist Churches, United Synagogue for Conservative Judaism, Jewish Reconstructionist Federation, American Friends Service Committee, Christian Church Disciples of Christ, Young Women's Christian Association of the USA. There are a number of religious communities that simply have a different assumption. The fact that religion and abortion come together in the United States is fine if people want to argue on religious terms. But just because somebody justifies their position in religious terms does not therefore make it right or sacrosanct. We live in a constitutional democracy with a separation of church and state, and we need to be able to allow for people whose views are different on this issue to make the case. Nobody is making you have abortions against your will. So I think for now that's my opening statement. Whenever we talk about religion and politics, one of the questions we must ask is, how do any of us know God's will? On what sources are you drawing your authority? Are you drawing upon official church teachings? To be honest, on this issue, we see that the mainline Protestant churches generally support a woman's right to choose an abortion. We see that the evangelical Protestant churches generally insist that life begins at conception. We also see that the Catholic Church has a position in which it has a consistent ethic of life and talks about life beginning at conception. So if you're talking about authority, first of all, we have to recognize there are many different branches of Christianity, and they have different conclusions on the issue of abortion. There's also the question of the Bible. What is, the role of the Bible? Are there certain verses that you would appeal to? Is there a certain way of looking at the Bible that you think is important for addressing this debate? Of course, the Bible is often used by people to talk about Christian values. And I would like to point out some of the passages in the Bible that do, I think, have some relevance to the debate on abortion. Jeremiah 1, verse 5. Jeremiah says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." So God knew Jeremiah even before he was born. Psalm 139, verse 13, David proclaims, "For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb." So he began to exist while he was still in his mother's womb. In Luke chapter 1, verse 36, John the Baptist leapt in the womb of Elizabeth when Mary entered her home. There are passages in the Bible that I do think are relevant to this debate. While I am not Roman Catholic, I have a great deal of respect for the Roman Catholic tradition. One of the things that I really respect about the Roman Catholic tradition is its respect for human life. And if we look at the Roman Catholic tradition, it is clear. Life begins at conception. And the idea is, I may never kill an innocent person, regardless of the apparent benefit to be gained. This is not just the Catholic Church's on abortion. It is central to its understanding of violence. Violence is permitted, but only as a last resort. And never are we permitted to attack innocence. Now, one area where I sometimes struggle with the Catholic Church is the Catholic Church does not make exceptions in cases of abortion and rape. It seems that a policy that would prevent abortions in cases of rape and incest would not likely get enough popular support to pass in the United States. I do think we need to consider some of the consequences when we look at issues like abortion. For example, I personally don't think that it would be a good idea to ask a very young woman who has been raped, perhaps by a parent or someone that is associated with that person, to have to bear that child. So I may disagree a little bit with some of my Catholic friends on this issue, but it seems that it's important to understand that life is sacred. Okay, I would like to begin with the passages that Drew Dean just read. Jeremiah 1:5, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." That doesn't say anything about conception. In fact, when in the womb? Right before he comes out of the womb? At conception? The text itself is not clear. Psalm 139, David proclaims, "For it was you who formed me in my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb." There's no mention of conception here. In fact, I think you will discover if you look at older editions of Christianity today, and if you look at evangelicals throughout much of American history, they would argue that the Catholic notion that life begins at conception is not biblical. There is no biblical warrant for it. In fact, I would go so far as to suggest that the biblical warrant points in the opposite direction. What was the punishment for a woman who committed adultery? She was stoned to death. Did they wait 9 months until after she had the baby and then they stoned her? No. Did God intervene? Is this something that, you might have a Todd Aiken or, a Murdoch from Indiana saying that God is going to prevent them from getting pregnant if God is going to demand that they be stoned to death? God's going to intervene and prevent this? I think the Jewish tradition generally has it right. The Hebrew Bible does not imply that life begins at conception. The word for spirit, soul, and breath are the same. This is not necessarily definitive, but at least it opens the possibility that those people who in good conscience believe that an abortion is the appropriate course of action can at least make a reasonable case and at least defend their positions, even biblically. If you look at evangelical thought in the last 50 years, you will see that there has become this consensus that, well, of course, the Bible says this. Show me the verses that talk about conception. Going back to the Supreme Court decision, the Catholic Church's position has also changed. Throughout much of their history, they did embrace the position of St. Thomas Aquinas. They did talk about ensoulment occurring sometime after conception. Natural law theory, upon which the Catholic Church rests, is clearly defensible, but it is not the only way in which reasonable and good people can draw conclusions about God's will. Both of you have mentioned the Catholic Church, and I would like for you to expand for a moment on your attitude towards the Catholic Church's views on abortion and, in fact, on the history of Catholic social teaching on a number of issues related to ethics and society. I do have a great deal of respect for the Catholic Church. In many areas, I appreciate their ability not to get sucked into the culture wars, whereas mainline Protestant leaders often come to reflect the values of the Democratic Party, and evangelical Protestant leaders have increasingly come to reflect the values of the Republican Party. I appreciate the Catholic Church's ability at times to maintain a principled position that does not fit them neatly in either political camp in the United States. I have a great deal of respect for a consistent ethic of life, which encourages us to consider every human being as a valuable child of God. But when it comes to issues of sexuality, when it comes to contraception, when it comes to celibacy, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to women's ordination, there are a number of issues in which I'm still waiting for Vatican III, to be quite honest. And yet, I must confess the Catholic Church has done more to promote peace and justice than almost any organization I can imagine. Certainly more so than my church, which makes me somewhat humbled when I offer criticism of the Catholic Church. 1/6 of the world's population is associated with the Roman Catholic Church, including many of my friends and family. However, I do disagree with the Catholic Church on the issue of abortion and when life begins. And I would ask Catholics to simply look at their own tradition, look at its history. Okay, now you're really starting to anger me a little bit, because the people you're talking about, that's not me. I'm not saying I'm trying to control women's sexuality and that, I care about a human being until it's born and then I don't care about them anymore. Of course, I care about all of God's children, not just the unborn. In this regard, I would like to return to what I do value about Catholic social teaching, is that not only am I opposed to abortion, but I also don't think that the death penalty sets the right message about the sanctity of human life when it is possible to incapacitate criminals to prevent them from harming others. Of course, I think that hungry children ought to be given food. The elderly, orphans, widows, I do think that they need to be given food. And if private charity is not sufficient, then I would support the role of government in this. Being pro-life does not necessarily make me a Republican in every aspect, nor a Democrat in every aspect. To me, when you're looking at God's politics, to borrow an expression from Jim Wallace, God is neither a Democrat nor a Republican. But I do think that we need to stand and we need to look at issues ethical issues, moral issues, social issues, and ask the question, what would God want of us? And to me, that is at the heart of what Christian ethics is all about. On the question of where do we err if we're not sure? I guess in logic it's called an appeal to ignorance. We don't know for sure who's right, so we'll assume I'm right. Let's think about this for a moment. If we are not sure, then why wouldn't we allow individuals to choose for themselves? We're not going to start forcing any woman to have an abortion against her will. I've never advocated that. If a woman is willing to sacrifice because she believes that the fetus is a human being, I have no desire to intervene. I have no desire to prevent her from doing this. Where is the burden of proof? Suppose that I'm wrong. Just for a moment, suppose that I'm wrong. Suppose life does not begin at conception. And I have asked people, women, families, the government, to make sacrifices, to respect human life. It would be tragic in some cases, I'm sure. But compare that to the idea, what if I am right? What if life does begin at conception? Think about all of those innocent human beings that you have condemned to death without ever really having tasted life as we know it. How would you live with yourself if you found out that I was right? I know, I like the way you present yourself as the compassionate one here, standing in solidarity with women. I understand women have been abused at times. They have been treated as second-class citizens. Their rights and freedoms have not always been respected. And I am not suggesting that we put women back into some patriarchal context. I believe in the full equality of man and woman, both created in the image of God. I believe in women's ordination. I believe that women and men should have equal opportunities to perform the same jobs. I completely agree with that. Being for life does not mean that I'm against women. In fact, half of all of the babies that are going to be killed are girls. So I think that's kind of a silly argument. But who in our society is more underrepresented than the unborn? They are quite literally the voiceless, the ones that you claim to care so much about. Can't you see why we're going to have a little bit of disagreement here? As Drew Dean has demonstrated, one can certainly support women's rights and believe that life begins at conception. These are, in fact, two separate things, or at least can be. While I think it is true that there may be some people who want to limit women's control over their own bodies, and abortion is one way they try to maintain control over them, I also believe that there are many people like Drew, who are firmly convinced that life begins at conception, and they are acting out of principle, and I do not see any reason to question their integrity on that basis alone. If one wants to prevent abortion, one should work to prevent unwanted pregnancies. I think there are a couple of ways in which we could do this. It seems to me that people who are serious about opposing abortion should support the use of modern methods of contraception to prevent unwanted pregnancies. It seems to me that people who want to prevent unwanted pregnancies would do some educating of people so that people know what happens, what is the possibility if you are having unwanted sex. We should have serious sex education, and I think we should have them in public schools. If you're serious about preventing unwanted pregnancies, look at the causes. Why do women have pregnancies? It's not all because they are underage women having sex and getting caught and not wanting to accept the consequences. The people who are trying to control women's sexuality say that. However, you'll see that many of the people who have abortions already have children. Many of the people who have abortions feel like they cannot afford more children. And yet many of the people who oppose abortion say that, well, once they're born, it's not our responsibility. We don't have to help the mother. We don't have to help in any way. To me, that's part of the problem. Another issue. Who's most likely to have an unwanted pregnancy? People who don't have good sex education, people who don't have access to contraceptions, modern methods of contraception, people who are poor. I think all of these factors lead us to the recognition that the people who are actually having the abortions are not necessarily irreligious. In fact, I think you would find that some very conservative branches of Christianity are far overrepresented in terms of women who are actually having abortions. So if I'm wrong, I'm not making anybody have an abortion. Search your own conscience. Ask God directly, what is God's will for me? To assume that we can impose our will on everybody else, when I think that reasonable people can and will disagree, that to me is a problem. In the contemporary United States, I reject those who say you cannot bring your religious convictions into the public square. I absolutely believe that if people's values are shaped by their religion, then of course religion will influence their politics. But just because my argument is religious doesn't mean that it has any more or less weight than your argument, whether it is also religious or not. In a democracy, every person gets a vote, and every vote counts equally. What would God say about abortion? About feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, healing the sick? What would God say about our obligation to our brothers and sisters? What would God say about peacemaking? What would God say about the necessity of perhaps in tragic situations of having to use violence to protect other innocent human life? For example, in the context of a war. These are not easy decisions, and I don't claim to fully know the mind of God, but I am familiar enough with teachings of the churches. I am familiar enough with history and tradition. I have my own ability to reason. I'm willing to engage in dialogue, and I have to admit, you've made me think today, and I appreciate that. And, I don't think that you are a monster. I too think that you are a brother or sister created in the image of God. And if I cannot persuade you on this issue of abortion, I pray that we may be able to work together on other issues of life. And I will continue to challenge you, because you have not persuaded me that you are right. You have persuaded me that you have given it some serious attention. You have persuaded me that you are not evil. but you have not persuaded me that your position is correct. Thank you all for participating in this event, and I hope that you'll be willing to ask questions, leave feedback, and thank you for taking this issue very seriously. I'd like to thank both of you for coming and sharing your positions with us on this issue. I would like to thank all of you for attending this event. It has been, I hope, an enlightening event. Among other things, I hope that we demonstrated tonight that it is possible to be civil. Some people are not quite so polarized. Some of us feel more like we have multiple personality disorder. It's like we can see this side of the debate and we can see that side of the debate, and some of us are really wrestling. So we thank you as well. I do hope that all of us can find some common ground, that even if we have not resolved the issue of exactly when ensoulment occurs or when human personality, human life begins, I do hope that we can demonstrate that we do share a common respect for life, that we do see one another as brothers and sisters, and that we are our brothers and sisters' keepers. This is not to say that we are going to try to create some kind of theocracy, nor does it insist that Christians have a monopoly on the truth. In fact, in the next series of Pulpit Counterpulpit, it would be nice to invite a broader range of individuals from an even more diverse set of perspectives. Thank you.